If you think about Chanel, the fashion brand, what does Chanel actually sell? Hello everyone, and welcome back to Narrative Equity, the podcast. I'm MAHY-MA-SOMGA, and today I want to start with a question, and I want you to sit with it for a second. If you think about Chanel, the fashion brand, what does Chanel actually sell? If you say jewelry, clothing, sunglasses, all that, it's all correct. But here's the thing. None of those answers actually explain why a bottle of number 5, Chanel number 5, which is actually a mix of Adelides and flowers, something that you could replicate in a lab for $20, why does that bottle sell for hundreds? And why women wait years on the waiting list for a bag? And finally, that does not also explain why a double C logo on literally anything reads as a signal of arrival. So with Chanel, the product is not the point, and it never was. Chanel was never about fashion. It was about control over how women were seen, how they moved, how they spoke. And understanding this is going to change how you think about every brand you have ever admired, and including your own. So welcome to Narrative Equity. I'm MAHY-MA-SOMGA, and I changed the format a little bit. Today we are going all the way inside one of the most architecturally perfect brands ever built. Here's what most people get wrong about her name, Chanel. Her name was Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel, and they treat her like a fashion genius. She was a narrative genius who used fashion as the delivery system. So the context, that matters quite a bit. Coco Chanel was born in 1883. She was born in Saumur, France, and her mother died when she was 12. Her father, I'm going to be pretty generous with him, essentially he abandoned her and her siblings to a Catholic orphanage. So she grew up with almost nothing, no name, no money, no connection, no family story worth telling. So the world she was entering, which looks like the Parisian high society, the Belle Epoque, the aristocracy, that world ran entirely on bloodliness and birthright. So you were born into position or you were not. And there was no ladder to climb. She was at the door and like way down there. Regardless of that, by 1921, she had launched one of the most successful perfume in history. And by the 1920s, she was dressing the most influential woman in Europe. By the time Coco Chanel died in 1971, she had fundamentally changed what it meant to be a woman in the Western world. So how does someone with nothing become the person who defines elegance for an entire century? So a lot of people here want to say she was like talented, but plenty of talented designers disappeared. And like talent is not enough. Like we know that in art, talent is not enough. So the answer in that specific case is that Coco understood something about narrative that almost no one in her era grasped. And the story you control is more powerful than the story you were born into. So she could not rewrite her past, so she did something more interesting. She made her past kind of irrelevant. Let's talk about what actually women's fashion looked like before Chanel. And I mean this literally, what they look like physically, like on the body, because brace for impact here. It was an armor. They had corset that reshaped, like basically reshaped your organs. And skirts were with so many layers that you needed help, like getting dressed. It was terrible. I can't even think of it. And their hats was so elaborate that they required like a structural engineering. The entire silhouette of a proper woman was designed by men, obviously, and for men to communicate status to other men. So you were essentially the walking display case for your wealth. So you could not run in one of those clothes. You could barely breathe. And if you think about it, it was the entire point. So Coco looked at all of this, and She had what we can describe as an architectural insight. She realized that clothing wasn't just aesthetics, but it was the entire infrastructure. It determined what you could do and where you could go, and also how you could move through the world. And she wanted that to change the infrastructure, and you will change the identity. So it's what she did. She took fabrics from menswear, like jersey and tweed, and made them feminine. So she obviously got rid of the corset that was like a punishment. And she kind of like make the hem shorter. She introduced the concept that a woman's body should be able to move freely, naturally, without any kind of announcement and not being like just a display. So the little black dress, which she created in 1926, it was a philosophical statement. It said a woman's elegance is not the sum of her ornamentation. Here's where it gets interesting, because this is where Coco goes from being a great designer to being a great brand architect. That's what we're interested about. She understood that identity is emotional, not logical. Women didn't buy Chanel clothes because they were comfortable. They bought them because wearing them made them feel like a different kind of person. A person that could be more modern in a way, more autonomous, and obviously that was much needed at the time, and at the end of the day, more themselves. So she locked that feeling to a symbol. And the double C, the chain strap bag, they were not just the product detail, they were anchors, emotional anchors that made the feeling portable, transferable, and purchasable. You didn't buy the jacket to buy the feeling, but a lipstick will do. And so you didn't need like that much money, and that's what I think is genius. That's the architecture. She separated the feeling from the product and then attached the feeling to a logo, which means the brand could live in a $50 lipstick and a $5,000 jacket simultaneously and feel equally true in both. There is a moment in Chanel's history that I think is the real test of everything I've just told you. And it's not a triumphant moment. It's actually kind of a catastrophic one. 1939. So I don't have to explain what happened in 1939. Coco closed the houses because of World War II. She laid off most of her staff, and essentially she disappeared. But where did she go? She disappeared into the Ritz Paris, into a very complicated personal life that included a relationship with a German officer that would shadow her reputation for decades. Obviously, she went quiet. It was war, and that makes kind of sense, but the brand survived. If we think about what that means, the founder, which is the person who basically tastes and entire personality was supposedly the product, she removed herself from the equation for 15 years. And the brand didn't just survive, but the brand maintained its position. The perfume number 5 kept selling, and the double C logo kept meaning exactly what it always meant. So that's only possible if a brand was never actually about the person. If it was about something bigger than her, what is exactly what she built. 1954, she is 70, and she came back because she was bored and broke, and probably she couldn't help herself, right? The French press was cruel about it. Her first comeback collection was literally like destroyed in Paris. And the funny thing is that the Americans loved it and the world followed because the narrative was already there. The narrative was waiting. She didn't have to rebuild anything. She just had to walk back into the story she had written. And then in 1971, she died. And it happened again. The brand survived again. 1983, Karl Lagerfeld took over. And he did something that only works when the underlying narrative architecture is completely solid. He reinvented the aesthetics while preserving the identity. So Karl Lagerfeld, he brought in new materials, new silhouettes, new cultural references. But at the end of the day, it was the same core message. A Chanel woman is autonomous. A Chanel woman is controlled. And a Chanel woman is not trying to be seen, she simply is. So the story compounded across 2 leadership transitions, a world war a scandal, and over a century of cultural change. That is narrative equity in its purest form. And there is something here that founders can steal. And for you, I want to make it actionable, because this show isn't about like having a history lesson, obviously. It's about like modern builders. And there are 3 things that you can steal from Coco Chanel playbook right now. First, your product is not your product. With Chanel, we see that Chanel sold clothes, but she was actually selling a feeling of self-possession. Nike sells shoes, but they're actually selling the belief that you have an athlete inside you. Apple sells hardware, but they are selling the story that you think differently from other people. What you are actually selling is not the feature, but the identity shift. And if you can't answer that clearly, your narrative is leaking value every single day. And that is something fundamental that we don't spend enough time on. Second thing that you can steal from that story is anchor the feeling to a symbol before you scale. So Coco, she had that double C. Everything she had was not branding decision made like in a marketing meeting, but they were natural extension of a deeply coherent identity. They worked because they gave people something to point to, something to carry, to recognize across context. So if your brand doesn't have an anchor, you're making people do too much connective work. They can't carry you forward. They can't carry your story for you. That's not something that you want. So the first thing that you can steal from that story, and this is the one that most founders miss. Separate yourself from your narrative early. Coco was the brand, but the brand survived. That's because she built the identity around a worldview, not a personality. And the day your company's story depends entirely on you being present, you have built a job, but it's not a brand. The question to ask is, if I step away tomorrow, what is the story that will continue without me? Okay, now that we talk about it, this is the part of the show where I want to give you one move. The structural decision that made everything compound. She separated the feeling from the product and then attached the feeling to a symbol. The feeling, self-possession, autonomy, and the feeling, again, elegance that doesn't ask for permission. The product, perfume, the jewelry and bags, there are more, but like that's a lot already. And the symbol, the double C, and the number 5 bottle. So because the symbol carried the feeling independent of any single product, the brand could live at every price point, survive every leadership transition, and compound across a century without losing coherence. So your version is, what feeling does your brand create? What symbol carries it? And are those 2 things completely connected in your customer's mind? If the answer of any part of this is, I'm not sure, well, you have narrative depth. And that's exactly what this show exists to help you. Coco Chanel just didn't build a fashion house. She built an identity system. And it was so internally consistent that he literally compounded for over 100 years now. At the end of the day, that's not just design, that's narrative equity. And that's why this show exists. Thank you for listening. I'm MAHY-MA-SOMGA, and I will see you again next week.